which SEC teams were overrated, which ones were underrated, who was better or worse in their record. We are going to look at how each team played in one-score games, and we're going to, again, look for those trends for the teams that maybe were a little bit fortunate to win some close games. Maybe they weren't as good as their record would suggest, or maybe they just lost a lot of close games and they were actually better than their record suggests. And this, again, does tell us sometimes, or at least is a trend for the next season, because the odds usually say if you lose a lot of close games, the next year you have a good chance to win a lot of close games. It doesn't always play out that way, but a lot of times it does. So if we go back to 2023 and we look for trends for, this past season, Missouri was 4-0 in one-score games. That was a big one. So you'd expect Missouri to potentially lose some of those close games and have a bit of a drop-off. And, that's what we saw. Missouri was not as good, and they don't think performed quite as well. We'll look at in a second in those close games. And then also you look at Ole Miss and Alabama. Those teams are undefeated. Alabama was 3-0. Ole Miss was 4-0. Again, the odds say you're probably not going to be as fortunate the next season in the close games. We definitely saw that with Ole Miss. It was a complete 180. Alabama also dropped off from 11-1 to 9-3. And then you look at Auburn, they were just 1-3. Arkansas was just 1-5, so you'd expect them to maybe bounce back. That was a big reason why I thought Auburn was going to be much better this year. But they continued to struggle in the one-score games. We'll look at Arkansas here in just a minute. So let's start with the teams at the top. And this was their records for 2024. So Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina, and Ole Miss. Now, how were they in the one-score games? Well, Texas was 1-0, only played one close game. Georgia was 2-1. Tennessee was 2-1. Alabama, again, back down to average, 2-2. They were 3-0 last season. And South Carolina was 2-2, right there at the average. But Ole Miss, that's the one that is really interesting. Undefeated in one-score games in 23, winless in 24. And we see that a lot of times where, again, the odds just kind of play out. So Ole Miss, now you look to 2025, could they get back on track and maybe win the close games? Or at least maybe it comes out average and they go 500 in those close games. We'll see. So that's interesting. Again, Ole Miss, the one that jumps out. These teams won all their one-score games. Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and South Carolina would have been 11-1. But look at Ole Miss, 12-0. Ole Miss, the only team that did not lose or did not win a close game. All of their wins were by 2 scores or more. All of their losses were one-possession games. So if you look at the highest ceiling, the best case scenario potential was actually Ole Miss. Ole Miss was the team that actually had a shot to go 12-0, a real good shot, but they lost those close games. So now if they lost all of their close games, Texas would have been 10-2. Georgia and Tennessee would have been just 8-4. Look at Alabama and South Carolina, just 7-5. And Ole Miss would have been the same because they did lose all of their one-score games. So if you average it all out, you get 10-2 for Texas and Ole Miss. That means record-wise, again, if you split the one-score games, Texas and Ole Miss were actually the best 2 teams in the SEC. And I would even maybe agree with that. I know Georgia at times looked really good, but remember, Ole Miss did beat Georgia head-to-head. Again, this does not tell the whole story. There are so many factors, but this is just one data point to look at. So interesting there. Georgia and Tennessee both would have been 9.5, would have had 9.5 wins. Alabama and South Carolina still would have been 9-3, so it would not have made a difference there because they did in fact split their one-score games. All right, let's go to the next teams. We got Missouri, Texas A&M, LSU, Florida, Arkansas, and Vanderbilt. How did these teams perform in one-score games? Missouri was 5-1, so once again Missouri was really good in these one-score games. That tells me that could be a different story next year. Missouri's definitely a team that, again, if the odds catch up to them, they're probably going to lose some close games next year. A&M 2-1. LSU very good at 3-1. Could have been a much different season for the Tigers. Florida was 1-1. Arkansas 1-3. So that's the opposite of Missouri. They've had 2 years in a row where they have not been good in the one-score games. Does that mean Arkansas could be a team to watch out for next year? Now, sometimes it's just a product of the coaching staff. I mean, we look at Nebraska. Again, Nebraska's horrible in one-score games. That's a trend. It's every year. That doesn't mean that next year they're going to change that. They've got to figure out how to change that. And maybe Arkansas is in the same boat. Vanderbilt 3-4. They played a lot of close games. So if these teams had won all their one-score games, again, we're talking about the best-case scenario for these teams. Missouri would have been 10-2. You look at Texas A&M, They would have been 9-3. LSU could have been 9-3. Florida 8-4. Arkansas 9-3. I mean, it could have been a much different season there in Fayetteville. And look at Vanderbilt at 10-2. Vandy just a few plays away from being in the college football playoff discussion. That is wild to me. All right, now we go to the other side of this. If they had lost all their one-score games, Missouri 4-8, Texas A&M 6-6, LSU 5-7, Florida 6-6, Arkansas 5-7, and Vanderbilt. You know, this, if it had been a typical Vanderbilt season, I mean, it could have been, because they could have finished 3-9 if they had lost those close games. So this is interesting. Again, the only teams that their floor still had them get into a bowl game, Texas A&M and Florida. So Texas A&M and Florida, A&M with Florida's schedule, that's interesting. Very interesting. All right, so how about if these teams split their one-score game? So does this tell us really what their record should have been? Again, this is just, these are numbers. This doesn't tell the whole story. Missouri 7-5, a much different season for them. A&M 7.5 wins. LSU, Florida, and Arkansas all 7-5. Does that mean those three teams are pretty even? I don't know. I do think LSU and Florida were a good bit better than Arkansas. So, again, that does not tell the whole story. Vanderbilt, 6.5 wins, so really not much difference there. All right, let's go to the final teams. And we've got Oklahoma, Auburn, Kentucky, and Mississippi State. So how are these teams in one-score games? Oklahoma's pretty solid, 2-1. Auburn, again, struggled. They were 1-3. So does Auburn have a problem winning these close games? You know, if we see it again next year, then I think that's just not a good sign, and that tells us this team just does not know how to win close games. Or we could see it average out and they win the close games next year. So that's going to be one to watch. Auburn and Arkansas, teams that have struggled in these one-score games for the last two seasons. Kentucky 1-2. Mississippi State only played one-score game, and they did, in fact, lose it. All right, so if these teams won all of their close games, Oklahoma 7-5 would have been the record. Auburn would have been 8-4. Much different season there. If they could have pulled those games out. Kentucky 6-6, could have made a bowl game, and Mississippi State, really no difference. They still would have had a bad season at 3-9. So how about if these teams lost all of their one-score games? Could have been an even worse season. Oklahoma and Auburn could have finished 4-8. Kentucky could have finished 3-9, and Mississippi State still would have been 2-10. So if these teams split the one-score games, the records are actually Oklahoma at 5.5 wins. Auburn 6-6, could have made it to a bowl game. And then we have Kentucky at 4.5 wins and Mississippi State at 2.5 wins. So again, you look at these teams, and that's what stands out to me. It's Auburn. Auburn 2 years in a row struggling in the one-score games, and I believe it was the exact same record. I believe Auburn was, yes, they were 1-3 in 2023, and they were 1-3 in 2024. If they go 1-3 next year, they're going to have another disappointing season. The odds would tell us they're going to be able to turn it around, but they might not. Again, we have seen teams that just year after year struggle in these close games. I don't know that we really see many teams that year after year win the close games. Like, they have a really good record. We did see it for 2 years with Missouri. So if they can do it again, and then that tells me that Eli Drinkwitz is a great coach and great at winning those close games. Because, again, 3 years in a row is very impressive. So, again, teams that were maybe overrated, underrated a little bit this year. No huge takeaways in the SEC, but we always like to look at this and, again, look for those trends for the teams that can maybe turn it around or maybe drop off the next season. Please let me know your thoughts and give me your comments down below.